Welcome to Southport Whisky Club and welcome to Mr. Paul Dempsey, who has got a new hat on today, or no hat. Paul was, I think, the very first person who ever came, whisky rep who ever came to Southport, 2019 or whenever it was, 2017. And you had a bag full of Spey, and you came several times, Paul, but your new hat has got Rebels, Guerillas, Voodoos, and all sorts of fancy stuff.
Oh, yes.
How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you? It's I recognise a few of the faces here. This is great. We did your spring festival. Well, this year, I think it was one of my final one of the old whiskies.
Yeah.
And your next one might be one of my first with the new ones. So, but this is, I think, the first virtual one. So.
Fantastic. Well, let's not talk about the old stuff, though we did enjoy it. But I'm sure we're going to enjoy this stuff much more. As I say, we're running a wee bit late, and that's mostly my fault. Where would you like to start, Paul? Let's get started drinking, and then we can
right. Okay.
have a chat.
We haven't got an order for tonight. Who else is coming in? I'm looking at you guys on an iPad now, so the screen's a wee bit smaller here. But 5 whiskies tonight from the current range. Southport Whisky are amongst the first people in the UK to have these whiskies. I don't think there's any real specific order here, but I would leave the Staoisha sort of Bunnahabhain to the end. Big smoky one. So it's a nice one to finish up the evening. I would start. I don't know if you've got what you've got labeled, but I would start. There's a whiskey called the Nailed Puppet, which is part of the Voodoo range.
This one here,
and it's 11-year-old Speyside that's been matured in bourbon casks, just first fill, so fairly traditional, but it's not from that traditional distillery. So I now work for a company called Brave New Spirits. We are an independent bottler and blender. The company's been going about 2 years, but we've only just set up a UK distribution. It was kind of formed. The two owners both came from indie bottler backgrounds. One of them from a company called Scotch Universe in Germany, which he co-owned. Anybody that Googles Scotch Universe will find an amazing array of casks that have been in some of the funkiest wine barrels, rum casks, the whole lot. But they only ever really worked in Germany, and they all had day jobs. So Alex, who owned that, has now gone full time in whiskey and partnered with Adam. So now we base ourselves out of Glasgow. We've got 2 big collections, and we've got contracts with quite a lot of the big producers. So we buy casks on the open market. We buy casks directly from producers. And we buy casks from wineries, from rum distilleries, with the intention that we can re-rack and finish and age and for a number of years as well. A little bit different from maybe some of the newer indie bottlers, because we've got warehousing facilities with casks dotted about all over the place. But the first one tonight, it's a distillery. The Voodoo range doesn't actually declare the distillery on the label. These are small. This range is small batch. But I think it's about. I'm still working off notepads here, but this one is around 1,600 bottles, and it's a small batch. We don't name the distillery of these ones, not because we can't, but with it being batches, we weren't sure whether when we did batch 2 or batch 3, we would even use the same distillery again. But this is a distillery that you don't often see as a single malt. This is a single malt. And it's a distillery that's rather known, or has become very well known in the last couple of weeks because it just changed owners. So you might well see this distillery in Speyside getting a lot more focus on its single malt outlet. It was owned by Chivis or Pernod Ricard or something like that. And if you ever drive through Speyside on your way up north to Duffton, you pass it. It's at the side of the road. It's a beautiful distillery called Tormore. What I was going to say is, Victor, on the iPad, I can't see the chat function. So if there's any questions come up, please shout them out.
Okay.
Okay. So Paul, just for the chat, if you hit the little button on the top and then there's a thing that says more,
Oh, right. Okay.
And then you can actually click into the chat,
Oh,
iPad as well.
right. Okay. But then it then comes up across the middle of everybody's lovely face. So.
Yeah. I know. I'm just letting you know that there's a way to actually see what's there, but yeah.
Superb. Yeah, because I should have actually, I don't have the old laptop. It worked really well, but we'll figure out a way around it. Thank you very much for that.
Pleasure.
So yeah, this is a Tormore, not one that normally is a single malt. There's very few malt releases out there from Tormore. I think most of this would have went into Perno's and Chivas's blends. It's a great looking distillery, and very few people have even been in it. They never do tours. You can phone them up, and they basically just, hopefully that'll all change under the new owners, which are Sekinder and Rajbir of Whisky Exchange, and because there's a whole pile of us want to get in and explore and rummage around and see what these guys can do with the whiskies they're producing. But it's a great dram to start the evening because it's got subtle kind of Speyside, unpeated, bourbon casks, quite traditional. This is a mixture of first and second fill bourbon casks. So nothing that's going to be too crazy or outlandish. You'll notice as the night goes on, we do the crazy and outlandish with these, but always interesting. And we're only releasing them if we think they're good enough. So, but very little in the way of tasting notes for this as well, because so please let me know what you think. I personally don't know why there isn't more single malts for this, but I think it is literally because it's been part since Tormore arrived. It's always been part of like a bigger distillers group.
Yeah, you do see Tormore around a wee bit in the indie bottles, and they always go really quite quick. I think we did we have a peated one from somebody? Peated Tormore. Where's Peter? He always remembers things like that. Can't remember, but it always shows up well, this Tormore, and as does this. Very fruity, very
really fruity,
very first second fill bourbon.
We're bottling this one is my notepad. We're up at 52, nearly 50%. Well, it's not too harsh. Tormore's quite a big distillery. It can produce a couple of million litres a year, but like I say, it's probably less visitors than anybody else because, my old distillery didn't have a visitor centre, but people could still get in for a wee tour around with a phone call. Tormore has always been, I think if you were in the trade, you might be able to get in, but when Spirit of Space Festival was on, they weren't open for visits or anything like that because the parent company it's the biggest secret distillery in Speyside probably. So looks amazing. I don't know what it looks like inside, but from the outside, it's stunning. So
it does. You can see from the road. It's got the big branding along the side, but you always kind of think, I wish I could get in there.
And it's a good little starting point. We're not using any we're not rum cask finishes or anything like that. It's just a nice little Speyside, gentle fruit, soft, no smokiness.
So, what about these labels, Paul? They're a wee bit kind of funky, and they kind of we've had a bit of chat about them. This one's got a nailed puppet on it, of all things.
Yeah, this is going to be part of the fun because when we do batch 2, I wasn't here with batch 1, but when we do batch 2, I'll get to come up with some of these names. So, it's not about making whiskey serious. There's an awful lot of tartan and shortbread even now. That's no bad thing, but this is, we've got an international team. There's our office has got 6 people in it, and there's folk from Poland, Germany, Scotland, Hungary. So it's all fairly informal. Quite. I think I'm the oldest person in the company. I remember what used to be the oldest person anywhere I worked. But I'm the oldest person in the company by some years. So, they've all come from backgrounds in, indie bottling and graphic design and stuff. It's good to have a bit of fun.
No, I agree. Yeah, I like it. I do like it.
And there's think back the last 10 years. There's been some amazing labels starting to appear. Look what Boutique have been doing. Their labels kind of took all the kind of they managed to stay traditional, but they took all of the sort of kind of stuffiness out of some of the whiskey, and I really like that. You know, people that don't drink whiskey aren't scared to pick up bottles like that when they see them in a shop. They don't feel, you know, it's a bit like, you know, the wine trade did it 20 years ago when you know, the Australians arrived and started calling everything Chardonnay instead of after the vineyard. Took a lot of mystery out, made it a lot easier to understand, and we want to have a little bit of fun with that. So that's why tasting note on the bottle. I take this in the company now because I can't bloody read it, but you know, the tasting note mentions stuff like witches' tails and skulls and all sorts of stuff, but the essentials are there. You know, the casks, and you know it's a single malt. You know how many bottles there are. You've got the age statement. So this one's 11 years old. Just a great one to start tasting with. So,
well, why don't we ask for a few tasting notes around the room? So, and why don't we ask someone who knows thing or two about designing labels, Mr. John Watkinson? You've done a few funky ones and for us in the past, right?
Done one or two, yeah. Done one or two.
Do you have an opinion on the labels, John, before we start talking about the whiskey?
I think my question about the labels is sort of who's the market, because they are obviously are much younger than maybe traditionally. You know, you'd go for the nature of them and the way that they're designed and the approach that you've taken. And you know, is that an intentional sort of try and bring younger sort of whiskey drinkers into the market? Is that the sort of driver behind it?
I think so. Alex, one of the owners, has come from an agency background, and you know, I used to do a lot of whiskey shows in Germany, and they're very relaxed. You don't have to wear a suit and a tie, and it's, you know, it's every age. It's a great, you know, it's not male or female specific, and I think, you know, again, I do whiskey shows in Italy, and it's similar there. There is a younger audience coming in now, maybe that are more familiar with world whiskies. So guys like Milk and Honey and Cavalan and Paul John have brought new, you know, more people towards whiskey as a category. You know, if you look at the average crowds that are coming to whiskey festivals now, they're starting in their early 20s. And crazily, in Scotland, nobody used to drink whiskey until you were way beyond 30 or even more. And it's starting to change now. We're starting to see bars doing more with whiskey. People are doing stuff that they've seen in other countries. And yeah, it is. It's an attempt, I think, it is a way of kind of showing people that we're not taking it too seriously. The liquid in the bottle is still as serious as it would be from any other distillery, but we can have a little bit of fun and muck around a wee bit, I suppose. But
I think that's the key, isn't it? You know, providing that the liquid in the bottle is at the right standard, then you can kind of, like you say, you can have a bit of a play with the label. You can do whatever you want, and as long as the liquid can speak for itself, then you've got no worries. I think it becomes a problem when the graphics and the artwork are trying to make up for something that's lacking in liquid, and that becomes a problem then, because I think it's, you know, it's not being done for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a place for tradition and heritage on company. So we're not going to upset anybody from 100 years ago by doing this. But again, look at what Douglas Lund done with things like Scallywag. You know, it's great, Big Pete. You know, almost a sort of cartoon character. To me, it makes whiskey more approachable, and the whiskey industry, you know, every sector of the spirits industry are always, you know, we always want to welcome new people in to listen and try, because, you know, they'll find something they like. You know, a lot of people that go to whiskey festivals are going for the very first time. It's a great place to learn. It's a great place to try before they buy, and I kind of love that. That's what makes it fun. So
cool. So John, what about the whiskey? Give us a tasting note.
Yeah, it's, for me, it's very bright, quite grassy. Those sort of quite green notes, maybe a little bit of straw. For the first one of the night, and I've just sat down, I'm finding it quite punchy. Then you know, it's over 50%. And normally that's not really a thing for me, but yeah, I'm finding it quite punchy at the moment. But I mean, it's good, and the flows are good, and it's got nice texture, which is always something I look for. So yeah, it's a good start. Good start.
All I'll say is my previous whiskies were usually at 46% with this occasional sing casks and whatnot. Everything we're doing is at pretty much natural strength or cask strength. So everything in the range is usually above 50. That might change in the future. And also it might, if we find casks that are naturally below 50, that'll be the case as well. But don't be afraid to use the water on this one, because you know, higher alcohol can hide a lot of flavors. And when you add the water, you sort of open up. I think you get a bit more sweetness coming out on that. Everybody's palate's a wee bit different, but it's strange having an entire room that sits above 50% now for me. So,
and to start a tasting on something at that sort of ABV as well.
Well, everything tonight is up around that sort of range.
So you know, there's not much choice. No, I get that. Yeah, I think you're right. The water does just sort of open that up a little bit.
I think a lot of the Speyside distilleries work really well if you get fresh. Up there. A lot of the distilleries are soft, quite floral. Works well as you dilute it down a bit. So
yeah, nice.
Okay.
Nice.
I don't know if it's me, but I think my internet's gone a bit shaky. Is everybody okay out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, all good.
Maybe it is me.
I think so. I'm just trying to see. I'm getting. Should I check the chat? It looks like I'm poking my finger at the screen. It's not. I'm just trying to work the.
Gary, good to see you on. Haven't seen you for a wee while. How you want to give us a taste note on this one?
I don't think I've got too much different from what John said. Yeah, it's lovely, very light. Pineapple on the nose, some fruits. Yes, very punchy. And going back to the labels, I just want to ask a question. And this might sound a bit awful, but sometimes whiskey can be quite stuffy. People will kind of pick it on the label, and you know, do you think that's going to hinder this any?
I don't think so, because we're producing in kind of small amounts for this range. So it's going to be the kind of places where I expect they'll be sold are specialist whiskey shops. I think when you start getting the label starting to influence, if you were standing in a supermarket, for instance, and you're buying, a lot of the whiskeys in supermarkets get bought by people who are giving them to somebody else. As opposed to, you know, if you go into a good whiskey store where somebody that's probably tasted everything on the shelf will be able to talk to you and tell you about this the next time. So that element will probably help us. If we were going to go mainstream and put it into a supermarket, the supermarket probably might not like that. But then we're not bottling enough quantities to do that. So, yeah, we do have another division in the company that does a lot of sort of bulk trade, because we can buy and sell in big volumes from some of the producers. But that's mainly in, you know, that mainly in the Far East, and it kind of helps the specialized end. It kind of bankrolls a lot of the experiments we're doing here. So it's nice to have that big brother partner side of the business, and I can go off and spend whatever money they make buying casks. So
I see you went on live on Whisky Online as well, did you not? Was it this morning?
Yeah, well, I mean, Victor will tell you, we literally went live with the UK distributor a couple of days ago. So the first people are now getting the stock. The first shops are now starting to get the stock through. So we knew we had this event coming, so we kind of was on the phone at the distributor telling them this one needed to go out quickly so that you guys could get the tasting packs. You'll start to see it again, but you know, you'll know the sort of whiskey shops where you would find this. It's the same place you would find other good single casks or small.
So yeah, I mean, I think we must be the first ones to get stuff out of your warehouse. I know it was a wee bit touch and go for a while there. We organised this tasting about 6-7 weeks ago, and Paul, you sent the tasting stock down, and we put an order in, etc., and it was just middle of last week before it arrived.
There's much, I know the big news of today is the fact that I'm doing my first virtual tasting for about a year and a half. There's nothing else happening in the world today that is of any consequence. But all these sort of stuff that you hear in the newspapers about the driver shortages, delays at HMRC, it's all true, and it hits whiskey. So we had to move these from the bottling hall up here to the bonded warehouse, and then from the bonded warehouse into the distributor uses. And to do that, you need a truck. And I think, things are just taking a little bit longer to move around the country at the moment. So,
fair enough. Well, we made it, and I'm glad we did, and I'm kind of glad we're first as well.
And it's great. Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And I think yours might be our first festival as well, which is next month, is it?
Yeah, it's 20th of August. Give us a plug there. Thank you very much. Everybody's got tickets. Bring your partners.
And I'll see. I hope I can see you all there. So,
right, next whiskey, Paul.
I'm definitely coming. So that means that you've got to buy yourself a ticket. Right, next one. I think we need to go to. Let's go to Highlands, and we'll go Royal Brackla, which is now. This is part of what we call the Rebels range. It's a Royal Brackla, so Highland Distillery this time. It's a 9-year-old. And grab nose on this. This one has been matured in what is called a Banyuls wine cask. Now, Banyuls is southwest France. It's an area of France that's known for making kind of old vine dessert wines, I think. So hopefully very sweet on the, it's like a sweet wine cask, which is unusual. Again, Brackla's, there's a lot more single malt Royal Brackla out there. They do distillery bottlings. It's a big distillery. But I don't think anybody's done kind of wine casks like this before. So
I think it's a first for me.
Now, these are single casks. When we go to these Rebels ranges, these are single casks. And bizarrely, for a new company, that Rebels label will be changing for the next batch. So that's probably the last time we'll use that name. Long story, but there's not a trademark, but we discovered that there was a company in America that has a bourbon with a similar name. So as we start to move out around the world, we decided it's probably better. A couple of lawyers' letters will cost you as much as buying a good cask. So we politely agreed, like, well, we're still new, they're not. We can still change the name for the next batch. So there's lots of arguments in the office now what we're going to change it to. We have chosen the single cask we're going to bottle. They're bottling next week. But this one, at the moment, Banyuls wine cask, about 205 bottles or something was a full out ton. You might have the full bottle number on I don't have a full bottle here, Victor. So
I have got one of 313 bottles.
313. Okay, that's cool. But it is one barrel. So Banyuls wine cask, probably kind of standard barrel size, which might have been about 225, 250 litres perhaps.
Yeah, 313, unpeated, unchilled filtration, natural colour. And it's 55.9.
So again, you can see that on the light, you start to see the wine kind of having an effect. And at 9 years old, so it's a full maturation as well. It's not a cask finish. But you see a lot of sweet wine. You see a lot of Sauterne finishes. I've seen Tokai whiskey being used, the Hungarian stuff. I'd never seen. I had to look up what Banyuls was when I got to the office, and it's a long time since I've worked in the wine trade. But it's not a well-known wine type outside France. But I love the way the cask has affected the spirit here.
It's really, really sweet tasting. It's really sweet smelling.
Yeah. There's loads of sort of candy floss and sugar in there. That's probably an example. I'd love to get a distillery, a sort of standard distillery bottle of the Royal Brackla side by side, because this would be the best example of, you know, how a cask can affect a spirit.
It really has taken control, hasn't it?
But it's been in the cask. It's a 9-year-old, so it's been in the cask for a while. So any of the sort of rough edges, when you see a lot of whiskies where you've got a cask finish, and especially if you're using, you know, brand new, one that I know quite well, if you use a Tawny Port cask first fill, you get loads of colour very quickly.
Yeah.
Loads of flavour and aroma very quickly. But this has had a few more years for the sharper ends to start to soften down. But that high alcohol still there, so please, a couple of drops of water to adjust it to your own palate. That's part of the fun with cask strength whiskies. You get to choose. You know, it's not like your bird's eye fish fingers where they've got a plate on the box that says serving suggestion. You guys can decide where your palate sits.
So let's get a bit of an opinion on this. Who we got? Margot, have you tried this one? It's amazing on the nose, isn't it?
It's very strange. I've never had anything quite like it. I can't decide if I like it or not. But I definitely liked it better with a little bit of water, like about I think 5 or 6 drops. Up the aroma.
I mean, Brackla is one of those super traditional distilleries as well. You know, even if you see the bottles, the distillery bottles on shelves, because it's, you know, it's Royal Brackla, it's up there and there, and it's kind of Royal D-side's probably not that far away. It's been there, you know, it's been there a long time. The bottles look regal almost. So I kind of like, you know, I want to try some more of it now. I want to see if this is the kind of whiskey that would make me go and try everybody else's casks of this as well.
Royal Brackla is a wee bit of a favourite of mine, to be honest. I remember it was one of the first malt whiskies I tried in my early 20s, and you know, there was all the story about it being royal and all that, but it was really good. And I'll always look out for it now.
It's one of, I mean, I've never been in the distillery, but it's one of those ones that's kind of super traditional without being, you know, sort of super unattainable. You know, a lot of the Macallan that's coming out now is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been around a long time. It's got this historic kind of prestige attached to it, but it hasn't gone into the kind of millionaires only status, which is fine. It's still there for drinking. So
yeah.
Does anybody remember those Karamak bars we used to get?
Yeah. That's lovely. That's good taste note, actually.
Especially on the nose, but on the mouth feels quite creamy as well. It's got that, and it just sort of translates real sort of big toffee notes and all that. I've got a sort of a bit of a love-hate relationship with wine, sort of finished and wine matured whiskies. Normally, they're not the sort of thing that I'd go for. So I was quite interested to try these tonight because I know we've got 1 or 2 wine casks involved. And actually, this is quite a surprise. I'm enjoying this a lot more than I thought I would.
It's kind of,
Actually, and the good thing about the single cask is, I mean, today we started doing the tasting notes for another 15 releases, which will come out between now and Christmas. That'll come out probably between August and Christmas. So yeah, ask me at the festival, because I might have something that's not quite been bottled yet under the table, maybe. Again, you never get to do that when you've got a distillery, but as an indie bottler, we might have some of this stuff lying around. So, you know, it used to drive me nuts when you'd see the indie bottlers at festivals, and they always had something, you know, hiding in a box under the table, somewhere, no label, just a generic bottle. So now I've laid the gauntlet, I'm going to have to find something to bring down on us.
Paul, do you get to choose sort of what gets bottled at all? Are you involved in that decision-making process?
For the first batch of Rebels, no, because these were already bottled or in the process of being bought when I got there. But yeah, that 15 we started doing the tasting notes for, we chose 2 weeks ago. There's 3 of us in the office that are picking them.
Fantastic.
It's a tough day that day because literally to get that 15, there was probably about 50 we tasted through the day. Some we decided to leave for the future. Some we would then decide maybe to change the cask and to a finish or a re-rack. We have to decide whether it will be batched and become part of the Voodoo range or remain as a single. And some of them, I mean, we're buying casks, sometimes we're buying them from private collections as well. And the weird thing about the industry at the moment, some of these casks, if you look at what it would cost per bottle once you bottle it, it might actually be better just to resell it, because there's certain distilleries there are folk chasing. I mean, we don't have much in the way of Campbelltown casks in the warehouse, but it's almost impossible now to get hold of certain distilleries at affordable prices. So, and with us not being so well known yet, it might be difficult for us to put a bottling out that was going to be 200 or 300 pounds. So,
yeah,
you know, give us a couple of years, maybe a few more awards, and see what happens then. So.
Yeah, the price point's key, isn't it? Really, it's because you've got to appeal. You've got to sort of get that market up and appeal to people you need to appeal to. And if you're going out with things that are sort of in excess of £100, I think people already are starting to get a bit nervous about that. And anything north of that, £200-300, you're on a non-starter. Really, I think you've got to be coming in at these sort of prices. What are we sort of between about 60 and 80 quid, which is
Victor will know the retail pricing. It's a long time since I have to go and buy it, but trying to do mechanics. Nothing in the current range that we've released is above, I think, about 110, 120 quid.
Yeah,
and
this
that
one's
was
pretty good.
That was a Williamson that we had. It's a teaspoon Lafroig, and we can't get Lafroig anywhere. We had that cask for a couple of years, so that came out as part of the Voodoo range.
Cool.
But I think there's only two of them that go above 100 at retail. So most of them, I think the range starts around the kind of 45, 50 pounds mark and moves up from there. So we want people to try it. We want people to get to know us, so that when the batches come out in 3 months' time, they know, and like maybe they like what they tried and they want to try some of the new ones. We don't want to scare them away before we've even met them.
So Paul, I might have missed it. Did you say you were going to rename the Rebels to something else? Have you got something else up your sleeve?
We have. There's a lot of fun with designers and stuff like that, and see, trying to find a name that somebody's not already registered. Because it's not just in whiskey, you've got every other spirit type, so rum, brandy, the whole lot. You have to go and check trademarks, and then if you find one that's not been trademarked, you've got to figure out if it's actually decent or not. But we'll come up with something, because it's getting bottled and we're going to need to put labels on it. So
so you don't have a name yet for them. So
we're going to keep, because what you've got on the Rebels bottles, if you've got one in front of you, you'll see it says Guerilla Cask. Now the Rebels was the brand name, and the Guerilla Cask was a sub-series of that. So we were originally planning to do about 5 different families within that. So there was going to be a range called Masked Heroes, which was single casks from distilleries that don't let you declare the name. So there's a few of those. We've got casks from some of these distilleries, but they don't allow you to use the name. Henceforth, you've got to sit and guess. You might find, if you look at the serial number of the bottle, there might be a clue, as there is with some of these things. I can't remember which bottler it was, but there was the Burnside whiskey that you're not supposed to name, and they called it Sideburns. Yeah, there's a lot of fun with that. So there was a Masked Heroes. There was a subdivision called Cheeky Wee Rascals, which is going to be whiskies that are about 6 to 7 or 8 years old. There was a sort of Warehouse Treasures, which would have been slightly older ones, probably from a more traditional kind of cask background. So those kind of family ranges will still exist. It's just the Rebels name will change, because we became aware, and it wasn't trademarked. It's not a whiskey, but we don't want to cause any confusion. So
okay. Mr. Dave Hunter,
I'd rather spend
the
company money on good casks than lawyers. If anybody's a lawyer in the room, I apologise. But shall we do the third one?
Well, we're going to ask Dave what he thought of Royal Brackla from Banyule Wine Barrack. Is that one you've had before?
It's not. I don't think I could pronounce it.
I haven't seen anything using Banyule's one before, and I wasn't sure if that was going to be a good thing or a bad thing. Because
You
normally,
like it, Dave?
Yeah, I like it. I like the nose. It's got a sort of, I don't know, like a dusty nose, let's say, and then when you get it explodes when it hits your mouth. I think it's just to do with the 56%. But yeah, I like that. I think I prefer that to the first one.
Right, good.
I'm really interested because this just been a new bottling range. What's the history? Where's the cask come from? Is the company been on the go? Have they sourced these casks? Where from? Because given given the cask used here not being a familiar one, is this a experiment with Royal Brackla that they've chosen not to go with, or?
I don't know if we've had the cask or if one of the owners of the cask in their own collection for the full 9 years.
Yeah.
We are buying new make, and I know Alex had been buying new make from several distilleries in his previous business. So he's had full oversight of all the casks or a lot of his casks since day one, which is different from quite a few bottlers because you can buy casks a number of different ways. You can buy them, or you used to be able to buy lots directly from distilleries. That's getting harder, but you can buy them with age on them. You can buy them in new make. A lot of the new distilleries are selling in new make now as part of sort of founders packages. But my guess is this is one he's probably owned from very early on, because his bottling range when he was doing it as a hobby in Germany used a lot of kind of exotic, kind of funky rum and wine and Marsala casks and things like that. And every time he goes on holiday, he comes back with a new contact for buying barrels. And he's away on holiday next week, so watch this space. He was in Portugal last year and came back with like some of the wildest sort of port casks that we've seen. So it'll be a while before the whiskey that's in them will be seen, but I can't wait to see what effect it has on them. So.
Is this a one-off cask then, or have you got different spirits going into similar casks?
I don't know how many annual casks we've got. This is a single cask, it's one barrel. But for instance, like the Voodoo range, I mean, we've got a Guerilla in the Voodoo range, which started off in sherry and then had 2 years finishing in Chateau Lafite casks. But because that's batched, we've got more than one barrel in play there. So that might be 4 or 5 casks that we've had together when we got it. I'm still fairly fresh in the door, and Excel spreadsheets make me fall asleep. So if I look at the barrels we've got currently filled in the various warehouses, it's a great anesthetic. But if you look at the actual casks and the actual whiskey that's in them, that's when it gets exciting. But our office is not where the barrels are, so you know it's a lovely day when we get to go to the warehouse or get the samples delivered from the pond into the office. So
yeah, I'll keep an eye out on future releases if there's any more coming.
there's definitely some pretty cool wine casks there, and we've got rum, we've got port, we've got Marsala, we've got various different things, different distilleries, peated, unpeated. But like I say, we're at the start of a wee journey here. So
I think we've got the full range that you've released so far on. We took at least 1 or 2 bottles of everything. So if Peter's on and he's listening, I wonder if you can tell us where they are. I'm not sure if they're all on the website yet. But I think I think the whole range is about 10 or 12 bottles. We've got 5 of them tonight.
yeah, there was, I think, I'm going to close the chat box again. We had 6 original Voodoo ones, including so there's everything. Two Isla ones in there. There's a peated Williamson, which is a teaspoon Lefroy basically. There's a Kalila, and Voodoo range. There's a Blair Athol, there's a Tormore, and there's a Dal Ewan. So there's a little bit of everything there. There's no Lowland in there. There's a single grain in there, and then the Voodoo range is single casks. So mixture of all regions, and we've got, I think, all 3 regions represented here tonight. So but I don't know. Let's if we pick up on the third one. I'm just looking at what we've got here. I think if we go lowland this time, and we'll take the Auchentoshan, which is another one of the Rebels range, and it's a single cask. Auchentoshan, great lowland distillery, closest distillery. Well, it was until Clydeside opened up. Closest distillery to Glasgow. And when I first started in sort of sales repping, we had Morris and Bowmore as a client, and they own Auchentoshan. So I used to get tours of this place all the time. It's a lovely distillery. They triple distill there, so it's kind of like the Irish distilleries. So there's, I think it's 3 stills they've got, which is really unusual for a Scotch distillery. And yeah, this is again not a typical cask. It's a first fill Marsala wine barrique, barrique being the size of the barrel, so a lot of wood to liquid contact. Not quite sure of the which one have I got there? It's this one.
212 bottles we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's at 56%, so it's pretty strong. The thing about Auchentoshan, a lot of distilleries will fill the barrels nowadays at around 63% if you ever go around on distillery tours. But the liquid can come off the still much, much higher. And because Auchentoshan distills 3 times, it usually comes, their new make that straight off the still is usually higher than a lot of other distilleries. So my guess is that this would have been knocked down to about 63 or something before it went into the barrel. We are age-wise on that.
10 years old.
10 years old.
Yeah.
And a lot of Auchentoshan's core range goes into bourbon casks. And they're doing a lot of great stuff up there with sort of virgin oak and with they've had a whiskey for years called Three Wood, where it jumps from bourbon into Oloroso and then into PX. And it's great. So I think the actual distiller themselves noticed that it takes the cask characteristics on really well. And again, hopefully that's something you get here. Marsala is a proper aromatic kind of wine, but Auchentoshan spirit itself is usually fairly light and not as forceful as you would expect from like maybe the Hebridean distilleries or anything like that. So,
are you a fan of this, Dave? Are you a fan of Auchentoshan, Dave? I seem to remember you are.
I am. I've only tried a few single casks. In terms of the core range, it's one of these sort of whiskies that a lot of people turn their eyes to. I've not really tried a lot of supermarket stuff, but certainly the single cask bottlings that I've had from the Indies, I've always liked them. Yeah, I've always liked them. And I'm sure, I think I had the distillery cask, we had a share of that in one of the club nights that I think Peter had picked up in his travels, and that was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this. This is I think a level above the first 2. Personally.
Oh, good. Glad you like it. This is probably the first one from the range I tasted when I joined the company. Probably just because I was more familiar with a lot of other Auchentoshan bottlings. And I always I love visiting Auchentoshan. It's a strange little distillery though, because it's got, and it's part of a bigger company even now, because they're part of sort of Beam Suntory or whatever. But when it was Morris and Bowmore, it still had its sister distillery was Bowmore. And of course, that's, a rock star, a legend. So I think that got all the attention in that particular company. And Auchentoshan just sort of plugged it along. People live in Glasgow to go on whiskey tours, and they go to Glengoyne, which is actually further away than Auchentoshan was. And it's just always sat there quite quietly tucked under the Erskine Bridge, But it's a great distillery to visit. And some of the distillery bottoms, especially when they rebranded around kind of 2008, got really, really good. A lot of bourbon cask work. But I love what the Marsala is a cask that starts, you see quite a few indie bottlers are playing around with, Marsala casks or kind of aromatized things. And again, knock it back a bit with a wee bit of water if you want. I think the water works with all of these.
It just melts in your mouth, this one though. I don't know what it is about it. it just kind of just disappears lovely in your mouth. Whereas it's quite forceful in the nose, really.
But I mean, lowland whiskies, it's probably the same, you know, up until recently when we suddenly got, I mean, there's more lowland distilleries have opened in the last 5 years in Scotland than existed in the previous 20. So, I mean, first time I was at this distillery, I think there was 3 lowland distilleries, Bladnoch, Glenkinchie and Auchentoshan.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a whole pile of them opened up in Fife. You know, Falkirk's now up and running. Rosebank's going to be reopened soon. Lowland is going to be back on the map very, very quickly, very soon.
Have you been to Annandale Distillery? I went there for the first time a couple of months ago. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I haven't, but we've got some other casks.
Have you?
So you might see some of that in a few years' time.
Okay.
Paul, did you say this one? Sorry, did you say this is this a finish or is this full term?
As far the only information I've got is that this is full term, so it's at 10 years old.
Go on, John. Give us. Do you like this one as a wine, or are you sniffing your nose at it?
I don't know. I do quite like it. I talking of Masala. I tried a couple of the Firkin guys. They're doing a lot with Masala at the moment. I tried a couple of theirs last night, and they were Masala finished. There was a Kalila, which was really, really good, and I can't remember what else there was. But there was, I think, there's 2 or 3 of them were Masala casks, and so they're obviously, that's quite a thing at the moment. You know, saying that other people use them, they certainly do. They were all finishes though, or seasoned casks rather than full term, and I don't know. I'm starting to wonder whether the full term in wine actually gives you a better result than a quick finish in wine.
Well, I mean, the information I've got is that these are full term, but they might have started in the bourbon because I didn't see the transaction that brought. But it's certainly not a 1 year finish or an 18 months or 2 years. It's much longer on the wine.
Yeah. The influence is certainly there. Maybe it's just better integrated if it's had longer. I don't know.
You're starting to see. Do you remember when port casks suddenly appeared? I mean, my old place had a cracker, and there was a lot of port cask finish, and a lot of it was coming from, you know, the Cavalan, Penderyn were doing port casks, and everybody had port casks, and it was all kind of 1 and 2 year finishes. But now that was 10 years ago, so now there are whiskies set in the market which have been in port cask full term, and the colour is not as vibrant, but the flavours have had much more time to develop.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the whole wine cask, port cask, rum cask experimentation really took off probably around the time a lot of distilleries had to, you know, move to selling, you know, when age statements started to get really hard to find, and a lot of younger whiskies were getting released. You had to make them more interesting. It would be pretty boring if everybody just released bourbon cask at 6 or 7 years old. But some of those cask finish stocks from then may still have been in warehouses, and you've had much longer exposure now. And we didn't have that knowledge in the 80s or 90s. So
is that down to just availability? Is it casks? The wine casks became more available and was probably a bit cheaper than some of the sherry casks and things.
Well, sherry casks have always been going up in price, but I think it was a combination of factors. I mean, the whiskey industry was, in the 90s, the whiskey industry was kind of struggling. There was, you know, more distilleries closed in the 90s than opened. So there's probably less money being spent investing in new casks, investing in aging things for long. Everybody was just trying to get their whiskies out to bring money in to save the distilleries. You know, all the new distilleries that have opened since then, they've got visitor centres, they're doing, you know, foundation things for cask members and stuff like that. But, you know, I know my previous distillery, and again, you know, distilleries like Arran, which was Speyside opened 1990, Arran opened 96, I think. They have to start selling their whiskey early. So they need to do things to try and make the whiskey stand out. And that's maybe where a lot of the cask experimentation came into play. We travel a lot more as well. You know, we started going to whiskey shows in different countries, or you know, companies became part of, a lot of whiskey companies were bought by companies that also owned cognac and bourbon and things like that. So it made sense to sort of use any casks that were being used by another part of the company and see what happens.
If you try this blind, I don't think you get anywhere near Auchentoshan.
No.
Well, that's where part of the fun, I think, because
it kind of is part of the fun, I think, because you know, if you're gonna, you know, put Auchentoshan in a full mature masala cask, you don't really want or expect it to taste like Auchentoshan. That's what I guess.
But the whole thing about indie bottlers, as I'm learning quickly in the last couple of months, I mean, I've always worked alongside lots of them, but as I'm learning quickly, you know, you get to see a side of a distillery that you didn't see before, because distilleries have got a kind of core range. A lot of them have got a heritage and tradition they've got to stick to, which for Scotland, typically sherry, bourbon, age statements, etc., etc. And indie bottlers can do something a little bit different. We don't want to replicate what the distilleries are doing, because there would be no, you know, there's no commercial sense in us releasing a 10-year-old that's exactly the same as an Auchentoshan, because there's no way we could do it at the same kind of price as the big guys. We want to make things a little bit different. So
I've done a few blind tastings in the past, and I couldn't get them either, even when they're known. You know, so in terms of a blind tasting, John, you know, you wouldn't know this was Auchentoshan. Well, if you just gave me a simple, I don't know, Deanston or a Glenfiddich or Tomatin, I wouldn't guess it. I've been fooled.
Cool. Right. Well, shall we do? We'll do the fourth one. Those of you that are fed up with red wine casks, you'll be pleased to know that we've got a red wine cask here. But we're back on the Voodoo range, so it's a small batch. It's a batch, so not a single cask. I think the full outturn on this was about 1,200 bottles. Bottling strength on this is 50.5. It's 12 years old, so there's a little bit more age. First full red wine. If you hold up to the light, that should be evident in the colour. I don't have the detail on the particular type of red wine, so these may well have been red wine barrels we just bought from a cooperage, or that whoever we bought the barrels from had bought them from a cooperage rather than from a winery directly. There's a lot more wine casks get purchased from cooperages or tonelarias, as they call them in Spain, because a lot of the vineyards don't like you mentioning the name of the winery on labels. So few distilleries get to do lots more of that. Brackla was always good because they were owned by a guy that already worked, that was also worked in wine. Most times, I think you see red wine, white wine, Sauterne, they won't mention vineyards or producers. But it's Pitlochry, so Blair Athol, this one, doesn't mention it on the label, but for Highland, it's Blair Athol. This is the distillery that's probably one of the busiest, most visited distilleries in the land. It's one of the main components of Bell's, who seem to know how to sell a lot of whiskey. It's one of the Diageo distilleries. But it's as far away from Bell's as you can get. So it is single malt, 1,200 bottles. Is probably no more than 7 or 8 casks that have been vatted once we've decided which bottling strength to go. And again, you don't often see a lot of Blair Athol single malt because a lot of it would go into Bell's or off to the blenders. So
yeah, you see it on the Diageo do special edition every now and again.
Yeah, it's like Flora and Fauna and some of the special releases.
I mean, that Flora and Fauna is a lovely drink. The Blair Athol's at a 10 or 12-year-old, can't remember, but it's pretty good. But yeah,
one of those things we've seen in recent, we'll see more of this, I'm sure. But there's 140 odd distilleries in Scotland, and a lot of them were never released distillery bottling. They were used. We've got our first cat of the evening. Brilliant. They were never doing bottling because, you know, effectively single malt's still fairly recent in the whole world of whiskey. Whiskey's been getting distilled in Scotland for a couple of hundred years, but most of it was blenders. That's why, you know, guys like Johnny Walker and Dewar became legends. So it's always a surprise when a whiskey that's normally not released often as a single malt suddenly starts coming up as a single malt. We're seeing it now with Glenallachie. We're seeing it now with Glenturret. And we may see more and more of this with things like Blair Athol. But as Victor says, I mean, I can't usually afford the Diageo special releases. They're worth trying if you do ever get a chance, because they've decided they're special for a reason. But this is a much more affordable option from a distillery that probably everybody has driven past and everybody's seen. Anybody that's ever driven up the 9 usually stops in Pitlochry for a snack or a comfort break or whatever.
So this one's called the Dancing Cultist, and it's got some kind of man with a mask on it or something. What is there any story behind the name, or do you not know it? Alex, who co-owns the company, came from a graphics background. He loves sci-fi. He loves comic books and all that kind of stuff. And I think some of that is coming through his eyes. So it's batch number 1 anyway.
Yeah, this was the first batch. We're going to release batch number 2 either in December or January.
Okay.
And the batch number 2 might not have this in it. We're still deciding, you know, and even if we did a Blair after, it would be different from this, because it's, you know, it'll be another 1,200 or 1,300 bottles. I really like this. I really like Blair Athol anyway. And if you hadn't told me it was Blair Athol, maybe I would. But it's this is my favourite so far, I think. It's the first one I've not used water on yet, because it's at 50%, 50.5, I think. Bottling strength here. 50.5, yes. So it's only a shade above a lot of the kind of standard bottling strengths you see in stores. And there's a little bit of white pepper on the inside of it, but not a huge amount. So you can tell the alcohol is not super high here, and it's not masking the flavors. Yeah, so really nice thing. Working really well. Margot, you got a comment there?
No, I do like this one. It is very smooth. It has a nice nose to it, and you got a bit of the creaminess. I always smell coconut. I have no idea why. I smell coconut. But it just, yeah, it goes down very easy. This is the kind of thing you could drink, you know, all night and be quite happy.
All day.
And I'm not a huge wine cask fan, so the fact that I like this is really good.
And again, we've got
wine casks, but
we've got some age on this one. This one is up at 12 years old, so it's a lot of time for any of the kind of harsh edges that you get when you do cask finishing. They just soften themselves out a wee bit. So.
Let's say, I think that what it's done is soften out the hard edges, because a lot of the others I've had a bit of a bitter taste at the end, and this one has a really nice, smooth finish.
It sits really well, and again, it's one of these. I don't know why. Maybe because it's been such an integral part of one of the biggest whiskey brands in the world. Maybe that's why it's never really been focused on. I mean, the company that owns the distillery, have got lots of other distilleries. It's probably just, it's a workhorse distillery. And maybe they should, maybe we'll see more distillery bottlings coming in future, you know. Well, the bottles you buy it, I mean, the bottles you buy, the Blair Athol that you buy at the distillery, they're always superb. The distillery only bottles, they're usually batches of 3,000 or 6,000 these days. They used to be single casks. They are, they're up there as, every time I go buy a stop, get one, even if I bought it the last time I would buy. But I mean, there's a really cool whiskey store not further, just a little bit down the street, from Blair Athol Distillery, and even then you don't see a lot of Blair Athol in there. It's. But yeah, I mean, it's got that kind of there's the fruity edge. It's like you don't get the tannins that you get on a lot of red wine cask stuff. A lot of red wine cask whiskies, especially with the first fill, you get a lot of wood, a lot of tannin.
Yeah, and that's what puts me off some of them, and it probably maybe puts a few others off. And this would have been the one that I would have thought. Well, I'm not sure about it. It's red wine cask. We'll see. But I really, really like it. My best one so far. How are you getting on with it? How are you getting on with it, Gary?
No, I agree. Every time I drink one, it's my best one so far. So yeah, all I can say definitely with this one. I mean, we went to Blair Athol. They did a single cask red wine, that you could pour yourself, and it was absolutely beautiful. Out of all the red wine casks, but this is just as good. Love this.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is where indie bottlers can have a lot of fun, because it's not a distillery you readily find. It's not a distillery. A lot of folk, you can stand in a whiskey shop all day, and you see it all the time. Folk will come into the shop and they say, "Oh, well, I know he likes Macallan, or I know he likes Springbank, or I know he likes, Chivas," and you can point to certain distilleries. But I don't think I've ever been anywhere where somebody's walked into a whiskey shop and said, "I really like Blair Athol." Victor's never come into the whiskey shop when I've been in there pouring stuff. But it's one of those things, there's more Blair Athol being played with probably by indie bottlers than there is by the distillery itself, because it's got it serves a bigger purpose in the industry. But that's why we're doing what we do. So
with that one, if unless somebody said it was a red wine cask, I don't think I would have thought it was.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Something on the nose that gives it away.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's totally different.
But it's had a fair old whack of age, though. And I mean, a lot of the red wine casks I've tasted have been younger, maybe new distilleries. I've done a lot of things with red wine. You don't get the tannins. You still get, new distilleries. Maybe they've got investors' money to start them off, so they've bought brand new casks to start with. In a couple of years' time, they might be using refill casks, and you'll get a softer edge. But yeah, I really like. I'm going to go off and explore and see if I can find other older wine cask things to see if that softer edge appears there as well. Because like somebody mentioned that, virgin oak and wine cask finishes are usually two things that end up giving you like huge amounts of tannin. They're quite forceful. Even at 46%, you'll feel the inside of your lips drying out. And I don't know whether this is just ours or whether much longer in wine casks it starts to really soften it down, but it's lovely.
Very good. Thumbs up for that. Right, we're coming on to the last dram, and I'm going to give a last dram warning to two people. So, Phil, I haven't picked on you yet, and last time we did a tasting together. You rounded up with some superb tasting notes and some of the whiskies up. So I'm giving you a warning. I'm going to ask you again, right? And the other person I haven't picked on yet is Becky, because Becky's our new chair of the Super Whisky Club, and I would like her to do the same.
Nice.
You okay with that, Becky?
It's a good job for once. I've been writing some notes as we go along. I'm
I knew you
very
would.
smart with myself tonight.
So the last one tonight, Paul.
Yes, well, we've had Highland, we've had Lowland, we've had Speyside. We've not had an island, we've not had an Isla. So we're heading west. We're going into the Hebrides today. We're off to Isla. This one is part of the Rebels range. It's a single cask, 254 bottles was the run out. 56%, and it's from Bunnahabhain Distillery, but bottled as Staoisha, which is a term that Bunnahabhain use for heavily peated. Bunnahabhain, for as far as the distilleries in Isla go, if anybody's ever been, Bunnahabhain is usually one of the milder Isla distilleries. You've got Lafroig and Ardbeg, Bunnahabhain's usually one of the mild ones. Anybody that's ever drunk black bottle blended whiskey, you're probably getting a fair bit of Bunna in. It's a great distillery. It makes amazing whiskey. And it, you know, it often challenges people's perception of what Islay whiskey should be, because they think they might have tasted Ardbeg somewhere, and you know, you can smell the TCP and the Germaline from half across the room. Different with Bunnahabhain, but Bunnahabhain doesn't produce the same spirit all year round. They switch as the year goes on, and you know, they're on an island that's famous for peated whiskey. So this is what they do at part of the time. And it's another one that has been. We're not on wine casks here. This is an Ecuadorian rum barrel. I don't know if Ecuadorian rum is different from Jamaican rum or Guadeloupean rum, but
It is. Definitely is.
It's I managed to I was overseas last week and I got to tour some amazing distilleries in Guadeloupe. And now I want to just, you know, I've ignored rum for years and I want to go back to it and start exploring. But so what you've got is peated spirit from a distillery that's more known for not doing peated spirit so much, in one single rum barrel. And it was, you can see it's probably not, it's a barrique, so it's a small barrel. Either that, it's had a leak because it was only 250 bottles completely. But it's a completely different slant to the Billy Rathel we just had. So the one, the folk that Victor has asked for the tasting notes, please feel free to start the ball rolling. Let's see what we can do.
That's a great nose.
It's
Really is a great
fantastic. It
nose.
smells amazing, doesn't it? Really, really smells amazing.
It does. I would never guess this was the rum cask. Ever. But this is my favorite for the night.
It's good. It's a good one to finish tasting, because this is going to linger for a long time on the palate.
Mm. Yes, it will.
But it's not, even although this is the heavily peated Bunna, it's not like a peated Ardbeg. I don't get so much of the sort of hospital medicine, you know, TCP notes that you get from some of the Islay distilleries.
Really sweet on the palate. Yeah, on the palate. It's like, I don't know, best way I can describe it is sort of like smoky dolly mixtures.
Oh, that's
It's got that sort of, you know, like a bag of dolly mixtures, those sort of sweet sort of flavours, but then that coating in the smoke. I really like this actually. I think the nose on it's great.
Yep.
I mean, I think even on the nose, you know it's peated, but you might struggle to identify that that's an Islay malt, because again, I'm so used to sort of a Freugen Ardbeg where you get the seaweed and the salt and the.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't have that medicinal sort of stringent. I can't even talk anymore. But it doesn't have that same astringency that you get with the Lafoy or a Kalila or something like that. But
I mean, those other whiskies are legends for a reason, but Bunna is, the folk on Islay love Bunnahabhain. It occupies a kind of, you know, you've got Buddy reopened and did a sort of lightly peated or unpeated essentially, but before they reopened, haven't had that all to themselves. You know, everybody else. You went around the island, you kind of got more intensely smoky and peaty as you drove around. By the time you got to kind of, you know, Ardbeg, it was just like you can smell it down the street. But it's a totally different smoke.
This is it's really like against the nose. It's really light, really sweet. It's really easy to drink actually. So I mean, sometimes you get a peated whiskey that's a bit of a challenge. This definitely isn't.
I've stuck quite a few drops of water and then maybe 7 or 8 drops, and I often find that with peated whiskey, once you start putting the water in, you sort of sweeten it up a wee bit. I kind of like sweet whiskey.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the I'm not so much a fan of the kind of lick in the ashtray 150 ppm type. Those are competition whiskies, really, for me. but I do love a good smoky whiskey, and I can imagine this working really well with kind of certain types of food. You know?
Yeah.
I guess this is like sort of maybe like an empty ashtray that you give a lick.
As opposed to the full one when you get the carpet.
Yeah.
Is that before you've used it, Dave, or after you've used it and cleaned it?
Or not, that's maybe like the old school, like maybe you could smoke in a pub. Yeah, if anybody remembers that. And they just tip it upside down, sort of all stuck to it. And you just lick that, and there you go. I really like that. This is really nice.
I mean, it's a great one to finish the night with because it is the only peated tonight. So if we'd done this second or third, it would have had an impact on anything. So it's a great one to finish with.
And personally, Paul, how do you feel about talking about peated whiskey? Because you haven't been doing that for a while, have you?
No, we had a peated whiskey in the range at Spain, but not huge.
Right. Okay. Of course you did. Of course.
Because of course they used to change the bar supply for the last month of the year. So before they shut the distillery at Christmas time, they would do a couple of peated runs.
Right. Okay.
And there's a lot, but again, there's a lot of peated whiskey coming out of parts of Scotland. I mean, you know, Ben Romack do a peated, Tomatin do a peated, and they're all good. And they're not trying to copy the Isle of whiskeys. But then this shows that this isn't trying to copy Ardbeg or Bowmore either. So still a fan of the milder smokiness. There's more of a special, it's more of a mood whiskey if I had to put the big heavy peated ones, and I'm to try it, but I like the fact that my taste will return to normal within an hour of this. So.
Very good, very good. Right, Mr. Jones, how are your notes? Can you read them?
All the way through.
All the way, Nick. We've got 5 whiskies. Give me a summary of them.
You don't want an order though, do you? Because I can't. I am useless at selecting because I've got to say I have enjoyed every single one. So here we go. Your Timor, very light, very fruity. It's light, so I was sort of peachy, pears. But then I think all the way through, every one has got a real sweetness and a sort of a peppery kick to contrast it. So I did the Independent Bottlers Festival in Birmingham at the weekend. They like a chocolate that the chap had put pepper into, and trying that, and that's what that reminded me of. You'd got that sort of sweetness that went with the chocolate, but that thick, very dry finish. Really like it. The Brackla, and this is just, because I conversation. My lad graduated. Well, he finished last year, so graduation this week. And we were up in Durham, and he'd been to France recently about Banyuls wine. And have you ever drunk Banyuls wine? And I sort of looked at him, gone out and said, I've got no idea. What is it? We were talking Sauternes and whatever else. He said, oh, it's a sweet wine. And he'd been in France and he'd tried it. He said, it's really nice. That's great, because when he comes back later on, I have to point out, I've now had a whiskey finished in Banyuls.
I'd never heard of that one before. I've never heard of that before.
Very sweet. So you got the honey syrup. It's like that sort of creamy vanilla stuff that you get in bits. Got bits of fig, and all that ran through into the tastes as well. So the Demerara, if you made a Demerara sugar syrup, it feels a bit like that, but you've got gingery spice, but with a little bit of herbiness in there as well somewhere. Certainly that fig taste running through. At one point I thought, yeah, the Auchentoshan is definitely going to be my favourite. That's number one. But I'm not quite sure at the point now. Again, you got all the fruit. It was like almost a mulled wine aroma, because it was quite a herby thing. I don't know, nutmeg or cinnamon going there. Very dry and again very sweet. but it was like, I don't know, it's that red fruit thing. I'm too eager, so I won't pick the raspberries off my canes up the garden before they're too ready, before they're really ripe. So they've got that hint of sweetness, but not quite. But it reminded me of that kind of raspberry bit. So that was spot on. As I said on the note, that the Blair Athol was really good. Didn't for 1 minute think you wouldn't have a red wine cask, if I'm honest. It's not really evident. I don't know whether you have the herbal sweets, but there was a real hint of herbal sweet on the nose of them. So again, it was quite a sweet finish, almost like icing sugar, a light pepper spice. And at the end, I don't know, to me, that sweetness almost turned like vegetable. If you do roast parsnips, that really nice sweetness. And I did really like that as well. Say though that I don't like any of these. About the Brackla, the last Brackla I tried from an independent bottler was absolutely bloody disgusting and awful.
I'm glad it's not from us then.
Yeah, but that's restored my faith in Brackla. And the bunner is great. I mean, I like rum finish because I'm sure that the rum is particularly evident, but you have got that real sweet smoke, haven't you, with it? That
I should have said this is the youngest.
Salt on it.
This is the youngest of the night because we're only
yeah.
6 or
I
7 years
don't
old here,
think
so.
it doesn't. Sometimes young whiskies are quite sprightly, aren't they? And I don't think that's overly evident with that one. Nice smoke sweetness. It's almost like, I don't know what it would be, honey roasted something, but there's that bit about it. Bit of licorice, but there's also that chili spice gingery kick as well in there. So that's probably number one. So sorry for waffling on there, Victor, but there you go.
That's brilliant.
Oh, that's a great job, Phil. Thank you very much. I'll give you a round of applause for that.
Cheers.
Thanks for keeping it up. Good descriptions, and I probably agree with almost everything you said there. It was did you mention a favourite? Is that the Blair Athol, or was it?
Difficult, isn't it? I really like the Blair and the Blair Athol, but also that Brackla was pretty good. So was the Auchentoshan, so were the two ones. I have a favourite. I like them all. The problem is I like them all.
I should also point out that by joining the tasting tonight, you waive all copyright. Any of those tasting notes appear on the back of one of my bottles in future. please don't sue me, because it means I have to spend money on a lawsuit rather than in Casks.
Yeah, but what happens in return, Paul, is that under the table bottle that you're bringing to the festival, Phil has to get a large measure of it.
Well, here's where it gets different again, because we've got, although we're still new, we've got a fairly decent big range at the moment. So I now know you guys have tasted 5. If you're all coming to the festival, which I hope is the case. I see something. Have you? No. Is everybody here from kind of Southport area? So.
I'm going to be in Malta.
In where?
Malta. It's well before the festival was announced.
I'm a tourist. I'm a tourist to Southport. I stay in Perth.
Oh, so you're just down the road from Blair Athol, then you can nip up and get those handfuls.
Bring us a bottle on the way down, Dave.
For those that have been that will be at the festival or the other events, I'm sure, which will come later in the year, we've got a decent range. I'll pick a different 6 at the festival, and we may even have next month's probably going to be a bit late, but if there's events towards the end of the year, we should have some new releases out by then as well. So cool. That's again is one of the fun things about indie bottlers, I think, is you constantly you'll never see an indie bottler with the same lineup twice at 2 consecutive events. I think it's a nightmare trying to memorize all the tasting notes, but it's a lot of fun trying to remember what you used the last time and trying not to do that again. So
Very good, very good. Right, I'm going to give the last summary word to our chair, which is Becky. Becky, how do you follow Phil? I'm not sure, but I'm sure you will.
No, everyone should always go before Phil. I feel like that's the hazard now of Phil being on these things. The Tormore, I have a soft spot for Tormore just because it's such a beautiful distillery. We walked part of the Speyside Way, just about 15 miles one day, and finished at Tormore. So for that reason alone, I have a soft spot for it. But I kind of got orchard fruits off it, same as Phil. A bit of ice cream soda, and barley sugar, so that kind of like sweetness, that kind of light vanilla type tasting notes. I liked it. I thought it was a good one to start. The Royal Brackla I really liked, but I found it a bit confusing, and I don't know whether that was just because it was after the first one. But I almost found it kind of quite dark in a way, like cherry drops. You know, like those cherry drops you used to get when you were younger. Those kind of tasting notes. And again, sweet. So agave syrup, which is probably similar to the fig tasting note that you were speaking about, Phil. Auchentoshan, I bought a bottle of this, so I'm glad I really liked it.
Thank you.
It reminded me of sherbet strawberries. If you ever had those as a kid, apparently all my taste notes are sweet. So if you ever had them as a kid, you know, that kind of like effervescent sherbet. So I'm very sweet, very, you know, fruits again, both on the nose and also on the finish as well. So just strawberries all the way through for me. Auchentoshan. I think that's probably because I thought about it and then that was it. That was all I got. But very much liked it. The Blair Athol, again softer. I was getting kind of medjool dates, hints of ginger, a bit treacly, so a bit like a treacle pudding almost, with a bit of ginger in it. But again, really nice. And then the last one on the nose, I was getting frazzles, which I'm sure is a very particular tasting note. But almost like soy sauce, a bit savoury, quite smoky. I could almost imagine like having it with a stir fry or something. But again, liked it. So I would struggle to choose a favourite tonight. The Royal Brackla I really liked, even though I found it a bit confusing, and the Auchentoshan. But yeah, all of them. I liked all of them tonight. So
Love it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Becky.
And as usual, now, because I've been drinking all night, I'm now going to have to walk to the petrol station at the end of the street to buy some sweets. So.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so I'll close the recording by thanking Paul. You look really happy in your new job, and it's great to have you on again and with some new stuff. And every time you come on, you'll have new stuff, which is something to look forward to. So thanks for coming on tonight and bringing this new range with you.
No, it's been a lot of fun, and it's great. Like I said, you know what it does? It doesn't seem like 3, 4, 5 years ago when we bumped into each other in London, and we then went Southport to do that first tasting. But thank you very much for all the support over the years. So for everybody, so really, it's guys like you that stop me working cornflakes people. So
excellent. Thanks very much, Paul.